Hello and welcome to your IELTS guide. This is a guided e-learning video series on the IELTS exam. It will introduce you to the exam and also give you useful tips to prepare. My name is Rebecca. This is my co-host Paddy. We're both teachers and content creators in the world of IELTS. In this episode, we're going to talk about writing task 2 and how to plan your essay. Now, a question that often comes from students is, what is even the purpose of an essay and what are some essay types?
Yeah, so students who've studied at university will be very familiar with the concept of writing an essay. And in high school, some students will be writing essays. And although the approach and attitude you take for IELTS is similar, it's important to understand what you're trying to do with your IELTS essay, because it may not be the same as if you're writing an academic report or something like that. So an IELTS essay, probably the most important thing that the examiner is looking for is, can this writer express a position and then explain that position? That's the most fundamental skill of writing task 2. Can they express a position and explain that position? Maybe it's their own position, their own opinion, or maybe it's somebody else's position. So the questions are designed to encourage you to present positions and then explain why those positions are correct or true or wrong or incorrect. So that's really what the task achievement criterion of the marking system of IELTS is. One of the 4 criteria is task achievement, and that's essentially, have you successfully answered the question by expressing positions in this essay and explaining them clearly. A second purpose of your essay is to demonstrate your language ability. And obviously language is a very general word. So in that we're including organization and structure. So are you able to organize your ideas clearly? If you start writing an essay without a clear picture of what you're going to say, it's going to be an absolute mess. It's going to be a soup of ideas, of stray tangents that go in different directions, and nothing really comes back to any meaningful logic. So can you express a position? Can you explain it? But also, can you organize your ideas in such a way that it forms a cohesive essay? And then, of course, you're trying to impress the examiner with your use of language. Now, this is a tricky one because some students might take that to mean, oh, impress the examiner with lots of long words that I've never used before. That's not what we mean. We mean the ability to use a wide range of grammar and vocabulary to express the meaning that you're trying to express. Not just impress the examiner with like icing on a cake. No, it's the solid body of the cake. You want substance behind what you're saying. So using big, long words that don't really add meaning to your sentences is not the correct approach. I also wanted to talk about what the purpose of an essay is not, because I see a lot of things in essays where I think that should not be there. So we've mentioned showing off long words. That's not the purpose of your essay. Even if you're taking academic IELTS, that actually doesn't change anything. General training IELTS and academic IELTS both have task 2, and it doesn't mean you should be using sort of PhD level vocabulary in everything that you write. You can use topic-specific vocabulary that you know from your field of study. Great. But be careful not to use it as an opportunity to just show off for the sake of showing off. The meaning has to be clear. It's the number 1 priority. Meaning is king.
I remember I did have a PhD student, so her tendency was to say something like, according to this study carried out in 1999 by these researchers, and she would try to include a citation as well, which doesn't work at all in IELTS.
And that's a great example of maybe having to unlearn some of the rules of essay writing that you learned at university. You know, I did philosophy at university. There are very strict rules about how you write an essay and how you cite references and so forth. But none of that applies to IELTS. No one is expecting you to put footnotes. You're not expected to include a bibliography. You've got 40 minutes to write 250 words. That is not what this is about. So this is that leads on to another point I was going to make, which is like, it's not about impressing the examiner with your knowledge of facts and data. I often get students asking me, is it okay to invent statistics for my essay? And the answer is, there's nothing wrong with it. You're not going to lose points, but why are you doing that? What purpose are you hoping to achieve? Does it make your argument clearer? Probably not. If you think that you need to invent data in order to clarify your position, you're probably doing it wrong. It shouldn't be necessary. So yeah, I always get suspicious when I see students saying 60% of students worldwide have blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, it's meaningless. You're not really adding to your argument. I've spoken about the importance of having a clear position. And almost regardless of the essay type, you do need to have a clear position. But that doesn't mean you should just add every opinion you have into an essay. An example maybe would be an essay on childhood development, whether we should educate children in schools or whether we should educate children at home. This is not your opportunity to give every opinion you have about education, every opinion you have about raising children. If you have an opinion which answers the question, fantastic, but it should be only the opinion which answers the question. We don't want to see anything else in your essay. There is a tendency for some people to say, oh, I feel passionately about this topic. And so they start writing about it. But does it answer the question? Is it relevant? Yeah. So don't just include any opinion because you want to share it with the world. The examiner doesn't really care what your opinions are. They just want to see if you can clearly argue a position and explain it. Slightly related to that is stories and anecdotes. I think we'll speak about personal information, but a mistake that students make is seeing in the question, it says, use your own experience. And so they go, oh, I'm going to tell a fun story from my life. Does it make your argument clearer? Does it develop your point? Probably not. In very rare cases, it could be a perfect example, illustration of the point you're trying to make. But in my experience as someone that's read a lot of essays, it's generally not true. And the final point, and this is kind of confusing. I've got, the purpose is not to get the examiner to agree with you. Now, that's not 100% true because you are arguing a position, and you're arguing a position as if you are persuading or discussing this. But the point I want to make is it doesn't matter if the examiner agrees with you or not. So you should write a convincing essay, and if the essay question tells you to give an opinion, you should give your opinion and justify why you think it's true in a persuasive and clear way. But it's not going to affect your score if the examiner agrees or disagrees with you. Absolutely never. That's not the examiner's job. Their job is to analyze your ability to structure a clear argument.
Yes. It's important for the examiner to see the logic of your argument, even if they have to stop and say, I still don't agree with you, but I can make this concession based on how coherent everything is here. You are right from that point of view.
Absolutely. It's something all of us should be able to do. You have a strong argument. I don't agree with some of the foundations or the principles, but that's an opinion thing. That means I disagree with your foundational principles. It doesn't mean their argument is bad. It doesn't mean their logic isn't easy to follow. If anything, if I disagree with someone's argument, it means that I understand their argument, and that's a good thing. They've made their case clearly. So in order to express those ideas clearly, we need to have a clear idea of the structure of our essay. So what tips can we give people about structuring essays?
Well, I'll talk first about something that I deem crucial. It's one of my favorite things to talk about in connection to IELTS, and that's about planning your main body paragraphs and how to do that, what the components are here, and basically the building blocks of it all. So it all starts with identifying the main idea that you're going for, because that's what a main body paragraph is. Basically a small piece of writing that focuses on just one idea. And the components that are involved are the topic sentence. So that's one sentence that just gives the main idea of the paragraph, typically at the beginning, but not always. The support for that main idea, and then an optional conclusion. If you're writing a paragraph, let's say about nuclear power, you can decide to give that paragraph a positive focus by saying nuclear power is our greatest hope for solving the energy crisis. Or you can go for a negative focus in the topic sentence and say nuclear power is a significant threat to life on the planet. But then the expectation is that you will develop that main idea in the paragraph. You can't give a positive focus to a paragraph that will then go into all these negative details about a topic. It doesn't work like that. What's important is that once you've decided on the main idea and expressed it suitably through the topic sentence, you don't deviate from it in the paragraph. This sometimes happens for various reasons, such as so much enthusiasm for that main idea that you don't realize you're deviating from it. And then you also need to make sure that the topic sentence actually incorporates everything that you're discussing in the paragraph. So in a paragraph where you elaborate on 2 reasons why people keep pets, you can't say in the topic sentence that there's only one main reason why people keep pets and talk only about that, because it's not enough. So one piece of advice I give students is to go back to the topic sentence and check it. Or, well, one trick for advanced students would be to actually write the topic sentence after you've written the paragraph to make sure it really reflects or mirrors what you've talked about.
I think that's really important. And another thing to keep in mind is that your topic sentence is not going to justify your argument. Your topic sentence is the argument. The justification happens afterwards. So it should incorporate the sort of the start and the end of the argument, but it's not going to incorporate the examples or the explanation, any of that. You should be able to look at the topic sentence and go, I know what this paragraph is going to say.
Exactly. And that's why, again, typically, of course, there can be exceptions. The topic sentence is not going to be overly long because it's just too much to absorb. If I just want the main idea of something, I want it expressed concisely. I don't want the whole essay to just be one topic sentence. Of course, your job after writing a very clear topic sentence is to support that main idea. You need to give reasons, facts, examples. You can't be vague. So if you're writing a paragraph about the fact that fruit and vegetables are very good for us, you need to say why. For instance, you can say that they give us the vitamins and minerals that we need. They also give us the carbohydrates that are necessary for energy and all of that. That would constitute good support for your point. And now about the conclusion. First of all, it's not always necessary. This is something that students need to be aware of, especially if it contributes to a sort of repetitive pattern in your essay. So if you just have it there for the sake of it, and it's kind of samey, right? In the middle of your paragraph, you have the same kind of conclusion. It looks like you've rehearsed that. It's formulaic, it's not original. And if the conclusion doesn't really have a clear purpose, you might very well do without it.
And to be clear, we're not talking about the conclusion paragraph. We're talking about a conclusion sentence within the paragraph, aren't we?
Exactly, yes. If you do decide to have a concluding sentence in a main body paragraph, that can start with phrases like, this shows that, or it is therefore clear that.
Or this is why. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, yes. And this leads me into the topic of cohesion. Again, something really important in an essay. Cohesion just means the way you link your ideas. And we can compare this to having road signs on a motorway, because they tell the reader what you're doing with your essay, where the reader is, where the driver is going, if they're taking a sudden turn and all that. In the absence of that, you can easily get lost as a reader, because remember, if you're the writer, it's your responsibility to guide the reader. It's not the other way around. It's not like you're supposed to leave the reader guessing about what comes next, or you can have this plot twist somewhere that really surprises the reader. It can't be like that. It all has to be quite predictable in terms of writing. So what you can do is, especially if you're an analytical person, you can split it all up into categories. So you can have a category like sequencers, where it's about the order of ideas and using linkers like firstly, secondly, the first advantage is, a further upside is, and so forth. Of course, you can go here from simple to quite complex. Also, if you're discussing results, consequences, some examples would be due to, consequently, as a result. Some students might be quite familiar with these, but they're not to be forgotten about in the actual test. Sometimes you need to rephrase, so you can use a phrase like, in other words, that is. Exemplification is quite necessary, and you can, I suppose, skip the usual, for example, and say, for instance, or to illustrate, to just have a bit more variety. And finally, we've touched on this when we said about the logic of an argument, that if it's a strong argument, you can concede. So that's when you admit that another point of view is equally valid. And two phrases for that would be, having said that, or that said. And then you continue by exploring the opposing point of view, but that's after you've actually acknowledged that a different perspective is equally valid.
Yes, I think that's important to understand, that a concession is not suddenly changing the topic of the topic sentence of that paragraph. It's just saying, this is true, although there is this exception in this particular context. And that's it's a smart thing to do. It's an interesting grammatical structure as well. Absolutely.
Now, what about some common mistakes or bad approaches when it comes to writing task 2?
I think something that comes up a lot, and we spoke about this before, is deviating from the topic and including information which is not relevant. It sounds like something which is so easy to avoid, but so many students fall into this trap. The best way to avoid it is to make a plan and stick to it. But even then, sometimes little irrelevancies slip in. So let's take an example. Let's say we're writing an essay about the impact of online shopping on city centres. And you might say in one of your topic sentences that online shopping forces small local businesses to close. So the main topic of this sentence is about a negative impact on small local businesses in city centres. Now, you might start talking about how in your city centre, a lot of small businesses have closed and there's a lot of people sleeping on the streets, and you might start talking about the problems that brings. That's absolutely fine as long as that is the point you're trying to make. You're trying to show the negative impact of this initial cause. The cause is online shopping. But it's so easy to then drift into talking about issues like homelessness and drug addiction, which are very interesting and important topics to discuss. But does it illustrate the point you're trying to make? And it's very, very difficult to separate, is this part of the flow of my argument, or is it talking about a separate thing? So be very, very careful of that. And the way you avoid it is you say, what am I trying to say in this paragraph? I'm trying to say that online shopping causes the death of small local businesses, and the death of small local businesses is bad because, and then choose the reason why. Don't just add point after point after point, and also this. Oh, also this. Oh, also this. I've thought of this just now, and I'm going to add that in. And all of a sudden, you've lost your way, and you're in the weeds.
And students sometimes do end up having a sort of list in their paragraph as opposed to properly developing their subpoints, right? They just list 5 different things. They're all connected to the main idea, but do you need that many? You can't really develop them within the word limit allowed.
That's so true. Students often say, how many main points should I have in a paragraph? And in some cases, 2 main points makes sense, but the example you gave earlier was you might have 2 reasons. And so your topic sentence would be that there are 2 main reasons for this thing. And so in your paragraph, you have 2 main points that are the two reasons. But having two unrelated points in one paragraph doesn't make sense. That's not what a paragraph is. So broadly speaking, the topic sentence should be the main idea and all of your points should relate to that. But yeah, if you want to write a paragraph about problems that this causes and you have three completely distinct problems, I'm reading that thinking, what's the main idea here? And it gets very, very messy very quickly. Yeah, lists are always a bad idea in writing task 2. There shouldn't really be lists in your essay, unless it's a list of countries in a sentence or something, I don't know.
It shouldn't look like brainstorming, right?
Precisely, yeah. It shouldn't look like you are thinking of these ideas as they come to you. That's called a stream of consciousness, and that's not what you want in an essay. The next point is personal information. Now, there's a common misunderstanding based on how the question is written. The questions will always include this instruction: give evidence and examples from your own knowledge and or experience. And some students take this to mean the examples I use in my essay must come from my life. No, that's not what it means. In most cases, your life is not going to be relevant. An essay question about raising children, it's not relevant to me. I don't have children, so I can't talk about those experiences from my life. An essay question about the value of going to university, well, maybe you've never been to university, so you can't possibly be expected to have experience of everything you might find in writing task 2. However, you do have knowledge of it. None of these topics are so crazy that you know absolutely nothing about it. So what it means is you don't need to be a specialist. You don't need to be an academic. You don't need to have specialist knowledge. You just need to use what you do know about it from your country, from what you've read, from what you've seen in movies. If what you say isn't necessarily true, that doesn't really matter as long as your arguments are cohesive and sound. So what would be an example from your own knowledge or experience? Well, if you want to talk about a government program in your country which has had success in helping young people through sport, then great, use that. I've just invented that example. You can do the same thing. If you want to use an example that you read about in the news that's happening in America right now, great. Use that example. If you know about something that's happening in China at the moment that illustrates the point you're trying to make, use it. If you don't know about those examples, then you can invent one if necessary, but in most cases it shouldn't be necessary. What will be bad in almost all cases is if you start by saying, for example, my friend went, almost never works. The first reason is it's rarely relevant. The chances of your friend having done a thing which is a perfect illustration of the point you're trying to make, it's possible, but it's pretty rare. Secondly, it's quite hard to stay sounding formal and with this sort of the academic tone that a task 2 essay has if you start talking about what your friend Johnny did last summer on his holidays. It's very difficult to maintain the impersonal tone of an essay. So yeah, those would be my two main sort of worries that students might get wrong when approaching the test.
I think you're right. And this example of my friend, interesting because even if the example is relevant, it would not be illustrative of what people in general think or do, right? And that's what you need in an essay.
And here's how you avoid that. Let's say you're writing about educating children at school or educating children at home. And in my case, I could talk about my cousins. My cousins were raised at home. And I could say my cousins were raised at home and their father taught them valuable life skills such as carpentry or learning how to fix things around the house that they might not have learned at school. And now they're very handy people who are able to fix things and be productive members of society. Great. What a wonderful story. Not appropriate for a task 2. Instead, I can depersonalize them. I can turn them into hypothetical people. Instead of my cousins, I could change it to a person who. A person who was raised outside of school may develop skills that are practical and manual that in the modern age have incredible value as we shift towards an economy based on AI and technology. Great, I've just created an imaginary hypothetical person. Maybe they are a real person, but I've depersonalized it. Sounds more professional, sounds more formal. A second great thing is I've just used a second conditional structure. I've created an unreal hypothetical scenario. That's grammatically quite interesting. So instead of my friend, just change it to someone who.
That's excellent, because it also helps candidates who might say, oh, I don't know what to say about this, but you do have this example, personal example coming to mind. So hold on to it, just turn it into something else, like you said, and that will certainly work and help you avoid panic.
For sure. And just to finish off, I don't think we can talk about task 2 without talking about language. Students will make linguistic errors in grammar and vocabulary, and the type of mistakes they make may be the same in task 1 and task 2, but certainly in task 2 we are looking at some more advanced sentence structure with linking. Things like punctuation become a lot more noticeable in task 2. At higher levels, punctuation can be quite tricky as we get more complex sentences with multiple clauses. When we talk about punctuation at lower levels, it's the really basic stuff like capital letters at the start of a sentence or in the word I or full stops at the end. At higher levels, when we say punctuation, really, we're talking about commas. In most cases, it's commas. You're not expected to be able to perfectly use a semicolon in every scenario. If you don't know how to use semicolons, don't use semicolons. Most native English speakers don't know how to use them. So really, we're talking about understanding the role of a comma in separating clauses in a complex sentence.
And also, no need to be a linguist and know about the Oxford comma, for instance. No one will ask you about that, or you don't need to demonstrate knowledge of that.
Exactly, yeah. I would do anything to never have to talk about the Oxford comma ever again in my life. It's one of the most boring topics. Other issues which students face are issues with word class. In some language, this distinction between adverb, adjective, even distinctions between nouns and verbs can get a little fuzzy, a bit of a grey area. Of course, in English, it makes a sentence grammatically correct or incorrect, depending on the word class that you use. So you do need to get familiar with common word formation rules for creating the noun of the concept, creating the noun for the person, creating the noun for the study, economist, economics, economy, all of those variant forms and when they're used and when they're applied.
And then some languages, where I grew up, for instance, there was a lot of focus on language awareness when I studied my own language. So by grade 6, for instance, I knew all about nouns and prepositional phrases and the things that people study here at university. I just didn't know that. So when I formally learned English, I just transferred that information, that explicit knowledge about language. And it was very easy for me to learn these terms in English. Oh, what's an adjective? Well, I already know, it's no big deal. So you can connect your knowledge of one language to what you're learning when it comes to English, because it will certainly prove useful. No one will ask you about it, like what tense did you use here? But it's about practical knowledge, how to use that tense correctly.
Yeah, definitely. I think having advanced grammatical awareness is really not necessary in most cases. But if you're a higher level student, I mean higher than 5.5, higher than 6, you really do need to know what a noun, a verb, an adjective, and an adverb are. I'd also include prepositions in there as well. Prepositions are, honestly, you could live in the UK for 30 years and still use incorrect prepositions. They're an absolute nightmare. Is it at the weekend, on the weekend, in the weekend? Most native speakers get it wrong as well. It's a very, very intuitive area of vocabulary. Learn how they're used in common sentences and common phrases. It's a collocation issue. They appear with certain verbs, they appear with certain adjectives, interested in, worried about. So learn those collocations. You will make mistakes with them, but try to get your accuracy up with those, especially at higher levels. We've mentioned verb tense. In task 2, there's so much opportunity to use a wide range of tenses. Present perfect for describing developments that are affecting humanity now. We can talk about how things were in the past. We can use conditional structures. First conditional, second conditional, third conditional, mixed conditionals. There's so many different structures you can use. And of course, spelling matters. It's probably not going to be the thing that drags your score down dramatically, but do pay attention to the words that you commonly misspell. Mm-hmm. If you're not sure what those are, then write an essay and then go to your browser or go to a word processor, put your essay in there, or switch on the spell check in your browser. If you're using, say, Google Chrome, you can switch on that tool and see which words are underlined. Copy those words, put them in a document or write them down on a piece of paper, and then practice writing sentences with them. You can't correct your spelling unless you see which ones you're getting wrong, and then you need to practice spelling them correctly. So identify your common mistakes. There'll be some words you spell wrong occasionally, and you can't really prevent that, but common ones should be avoided.
Yes. I really like this approach of taking an active part of improving your spelling because it doesn't happen automatically. And one other thing to mention in connection to spelling is that you need to be consistent. If you're going for American spelling, perfectly fine, but don't suddenly switch to British in terms of double letters or the letter U in the word color and all that.
I think that's important. Yeah, the spelling you choose for a word should stay consistent across an essay. Many students will not be 100% familiar with what the American spelling is or what the British spelling is, but broadly speaking, you should stay consistent across an essay, definitely. And the other thing worth mentioning is synonyms. One of the best ways to indicate a lower level of vocabulary is to be forced to repeat words over and over because you have no idea how to say it any other way. That is how you, on the flip side, illustrate that you've got a higher level of vocabulary. Now, it's tricky because some words don't have synonyms. If we are writing an essay about deforestation, well, there's different ways of saying that, cutting down trees, logging, but ultimately the issue of deforestation has a word, it's a technical term, and there's not many different ways of saying that. Climate change, again, that's gone through several changes. Climate crisis, global warming, we don't use so much anymore. But again, some terms have specific usage. You will use it multiple times in your essay. But wherever possible, you should be looking to paraphrase, use synonyms, because if you use the word children a million times in one essay, it's going to get very, very repetitive, and it's going to illustrate an inability to paraphrase. Paraphrasing is not just using synonyms either. You can also restructure the sentence so that you're not using a noun, but you're using a verb form, or you're using an adjective form or an adverb form as well.
That's great. And if we talk about writing and one essay type is problem solution, for instance, and there is a chance of you getting that, I think it's really good to try and focus on that. Well, what are words I can use instead of problem, since it's quite likely that I will get this in my writing, and you can just have a short list there. And this becomes so easy to do once you have your list and then you write a few problem solution essays, then you'll do this effortlessly. You'll just take the synonyms you know and use them, and you won't have to look at this problem anymore because it won't be there.
I think in a future episode, we can go into more detail about the different essay types and what's expected. On a basic level, there's 5 essay types, I think we can say. So we've got problem and solution essays that you've mentioned, where you're presented with a negative situation and you're asked to give the causes or sometimes the effects of that problem and then present a solution. We've got discussion essays, where you have to give at least an argument on both sides of the debate, and often you're presenting your own opinion. They ask you to do so. There's opinion essays, which are kind of similar to discussion essays, except your job is really to present one side. It's okay to mention the other side, but perhaps to attack it with a counter argument or to show that your opinion doesn't fully fall on one side. So there's numerous reasons why you might do that. We then have 2-part question essays or double question essays. This is where you are presented with 2 questions, and one of them is usually opinion-based. So, for example, it's a question about giving devices and technology to young children. It might be what are the effects of giving devices to young children, and should parents do it? So one of those should is an opinion, and the other is talking about just tangible effects. That's arguably a fact-based question. And what have I missed?
I can't remember. Advantages and disadvantages, I think.
Advantages and disadvantages, of course. So advantages and disadvantages is pretty much what it sounds like. It's pretty similar to discussion-based questions in that you have to give the positive aspects of something and the negative aspects of something. Now, all of those do sound like very different essays, and that's true, and there's maybe a slightly different approach for each one, but fundamentally the structure in terms of an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion is exactly the same. And also the requirement to make your position clear is actually very important in all of them. And this is something that can be difficult to understand for students because some essay questions don't say, give your opinion, because opinion is often the wrong way to think about it. A position is the message of the essay. So for example, a problem and solution essay, your position will be, this is the best solution to that problem. So as long as that stuff is in your conclusion, sometimes also in your introduction, then you're going to be conveying a position clearly and you're justifying it in your essay.
That's excellent. I think that's very useful knowledge for our students to have.
Great.
Thank you for watching your IELTS Guide. Remember that you can do more IELTS practice and see more classes on IELTS Ready Premium. Until then, good luck with your studies.